We'll call the meeting to order for the Wicomico County Council for legislative session 2022-05, March 15, 2022. Those that would like to stand and join us in the Lord's Prayer and Pledge of Allegiance, please do.
Our Father,
art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth
as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you do have cell phones, I'd like to ask you to please turn those off out of respect for the others in the room. Entertain a motion from council to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
A motion is second. Any corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. The consent agenda has been approved. At this time, we have a proclamation for the recognition of the month of March as Endometriosis Awareness Month. I could have told you a week ago I wasn't going to get that right. Councilman McCain, he gets to read the proclamation. Thank you. Do we have Shannon Hannawal? There you are. Yes, please. Thank you. Shannon is the ambassador of Endometriosis Association.
Yeah. John couldn't say it, so he had me do the.
You can just say endo if you want.
No, I'm good. We have a proclamation here, and I will read this and then present this to you. This is a proclamation for Endometriosis Awareness Month, whereas endometriosis is an inflammatory condition in which the tissue that normally lines the uterus grows outside of the uterus and can be found on ovaries, fallopian tubes, and intestines. And whereas it is estimated that 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, which can cause severe pain, infertility, dysmenorrhea, and whereas the Endometriosis Association began Endometriosis Awareness Month in 1993 to increase awareness and education about the painful disorder plaguing an estimated 175 million women across the globe. Now, therefore, the Wicomico County Council and the Acting County Executive hereby proclaim March 2022 as Endometriosis Awareness Month in Wicomico County. And this is signed by John Pota, our Acting County Executive, and all the County Council members.
Thank you.
Yep. Can you say a few words?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I wanted to thank everybody for having me here. My name is Shannon Hannawal. I am a wife and a mother. I am also 1 in 10. 1 in 10 women who have endometriosis. I am the founder of Endo Warriors of the Eastern Shore and an ambassador for the Endometriosis Association. Endometriosis is a disease that affects all aspects of your life. Emotionally, mentally, and physically, endometriosis can take everything from you, and it did me until I decided it was time to fight back. Fight for awareness, education, and support so that generations after me do not have to go through what I and so many other women have. My pain started when I was 15 years old and started as the doctor saying I had ovarian cyst rupturing. After that, my pain just increased and the help and knowledge from the doctors decreased. My parents took me to so many doctors, and I had more CT scans and ultrasounds than I can count, all coming back with the results of nothing. How was that possible? I was in excruciating, debilitating pain that nobody could seem to help me with. My parents started to believe the doctors that I was just trying to get out of school. And honestly, when I look back on it now, they didn't really have a choice. Endometriosis not only affects you physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. I had severe depression and anxiety because nobody would listen or help me. I felt so alone and so dismissed. After 5 years, I finally found a doctor that would listen to me, and as soon as I told him my symptoms, he said, "I'm certain you have endometriosis." Endometriosis, what was that, and why had nobody else even mentioned this to me or my parents? The only way to diagnose endometriosis is through laparoscopic surgery. No blood work, no ultrasounds, no MRIs, no CT scans, just surgery. We scheduled my surgery, and sure enough, I had stage 4 endometriosis. That was the first of my 13 surgeries to try and help remove the lesions to help with the pain. One of the other main symptoms of endometriosis is infertility. The longer it takes to diagnose, the less chance you have of getting pregnant. By the grace of God, I was able to have my first son with no intervention, but for my second son, I had to go through fertility treatments. Endometriosis has taken so much from me. I missed so many important dates and celebrations with family and friends. It took away my ability to have children like other women. It took a baby from me during fertility treatments, a baby that was loved and dreamt of, a baby that is missed and talked about daily. Endometriosis has no cure, only treatments. Some doctors will say to have a hysterectomy, but that will not stop it from growing on other organs. Some women do not experience the pain. They only find out about it about their condition when they are unable to conceive a child. Unfortunately, there are not many doctors, especially on the Eastern Shore, who have any knowledge about this disease. I've had numerous doctors tell me that they had 30 minutes of education about endometriosis in medical school. That makes absolutely no sense. If endometriosis affects 1 in 10 women, why are the doctors and nurses only being educated for 30 minutes about this disease? Thankfully, over the last 20 years, there's been more awareness and education about endometriosis, but we are nowhere where we need to be, not even close. I feel as though my niece said it best, and it applies to all of us who fight endometriosis. She used the quote, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." This quote to her shows importance in each of our stories and the constant battlefield we're on. She said, "I have taken my diagnosis and grown from it, and I have defined my character and have made a difference for others. I know some women do not want to speak publicly about a disease that is so personal, so I will speak for them. I will not stop until when someone says the word endometriosis, every single person will know what that is, as much as they know what strep throat or an ear infection are. It is imperative that we all work together and support each other through this journey. My passion and drive are because I do not want anyone to go through what I have, but I have chosen to fight because you never know who is watching and learning from you. I ask you to remember, just because someone looks okay on the outside doesn't mean they are okay on the inside. If someone says they have endo, please remember this point in time and you will know how they feel. Endo affects each of us differently. It is such a complex disease and it requires numerous specialists for each patient. There are no two stories the same. A quote by Maya Angelou was brought to my attention recently, and I think it defines endometriosis perfectly. Each of us has lived through some devastation, some loneliness, some weather superstorm, or spiritual superstorm. When we look at each other, we must say, I understand. I understand how you feel because I have been there myself. We must support each other and empathize with each other because each of us is more alike than we are unalike. I will always be 1 in 10, but I also will be the one who speaks up and fights for anyone who suffers from this disease and their support system to help them through this difficult path in life." Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Very much. Really appreciate it. Laura.
Laura, you can move.
Right next to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have a proclamation to recognize the month of March as National Nutrition Month. We have Ms. Karen Redderson, Lynn Mateva, and Dhruti Patel.
I'd like to thank Council President Cannon and Councilman McCain. Endometriosis is a very difficult topic and can be somewhat taboo for men to discuss, so I appreciate the two of you doing that. Changing gears, proclamation for National Nutrition Month. National Nutrition Month is a month to recognize and bring public awareness to good food choices, the importance of physical activity in your diet, and your overall health. So we now proclaim this National Nutrition Month, whereas National Nutrition Month is an annual campaign created by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to focus on the importance of making informed choices, developing healthy eating habits. National Nutrition Month promotes the academies and its members, the public, as the most valuable and credible sources of timely scientific-based food and nutrition information. Whereas the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics' mission is to promote optimal nutrition and well-being for all people by advocating for its members, and is the world's largest organization of food and nutrition professionals and experts. Now, therefore, the Wicomico County Council and the County Executive hereby proclaim March 2022 is National Nutrition Month in Wicomico County. I have had the pleasure of working with all three of these lovely ladies, and they have done an amazing job in supporting Wicomico County and the Eastern Shore in the education of nutrition. So I'll let you have the words.
Excuse me, Karen Redderson, just want to say a quick thank you for supporting University of Maryland Extension. Nutrition is one of our many facets that we have in the county, certainly agriculture education, nutrition, financial literacy, watershed quality, many other areas. So this is just one of the many things that we're doing, and I'm going to let our two faculty members share just briefly what they do to touch the citizens in our county. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I would just like to introduce a little bit about our Family and Consumer Sciences program. That is one of the programs that Karen just mentioned. Within the Family Consumer Science umbrella of University of Maryland Extension, our goal is to provide evidence-based, research-based information and disseminate it, make it more relatable to our community. But at heart of it all, we want to serve our community, and that is where we educators thrive the most. And we could not do that without amazing stakeholders and partners we work with. Few of those examples are our drug court is one of the examples, and so are senior centers within our Wicomico County, and those are just few examples. And most of all, it's our audience. They make our program successful, and the stories that they share are the ones that we strive to attain the most. Whether it's them reporting that their A1C level went down because of the diabetes education program, or someone from the drug court saying that thank you for just giving me space to just be because I've had a very tough time going through recovery process. These are heartwarming stories that we hear on almost everyday basis, and that's what keeps us going. And lastly, we do appreciate all the support that we receive from the county to help us keep going and keep doing wonderful jobs. So thank you, everyone. I'll let Lynn Mateva now go ahead and talk about her program.
Thank you. Good morning. I work in the Maryland SNAP Ed program, and there's at least one of us in every county, but we deliver SNAP nutrition education within the schools. We do work with farm markets. We do work with food security systems. And basically, I get to spend my days playing with kids, teaching them how to prepare food, teaching them how to garden, getting them to try fruits and vegetables and be excited about it. And it's not too shabby of a job, so I have a lot of fun. I was just thinking when Drudy was talking about the stories that I had a little boy just before the pandemic. He was chopping up his fruits and vegetables, and he looked at me and he said, "Look at me, like a real man, I'm cooking some food." So that's what my days look like most of the time. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to serve this, and thank you.
Morning, Ms. Hurley.
Good morning, Mr. President, council members, ladies and gentlemen. The first item we have on the agenda this morning is an audit presentation by PKS and Company, and we have several representatives here.
Good morning. If you could please state your name and your position, we'd appreciate it, and your association as well.
Good morning. My name is Mike Klegger. I'm a partner with PKS and Company.
Good morning. I'm Ryan Taylor. I'm a supervisor with PKS and Company.
And I'm Ashley Stern. I'm a partner with PKS and Company.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you for inviting us here this morning. And joining me, as I said, is Ashley Stern and Ryan Taylor. And we have previously delivered a draft of the financial statements and the reports and presented those to the county executive, the finance director, and some other members of the management team. So our purpose today is to present the audit results, mention some of the key highlights, and then to, of course, address any questions you might have for us today. I'd like to begin with the audit report itself. which in the bound financial statements, which is about 145 pages long, it's pages 1 through 3. And pages 1 through the top of page 2 kind of cover management's responsibilities for the financial statements, their preparation, as well as their fair presentation. And on page 2 at the top, it really discusses our responsibility as auditors to gather evidence and perform audit procedures in order to express an opinion on those statements. The most important paragraph is really the middle of page 2 of the opinion, is the opinion paragraph itself. And I'm happy to report that our opinion on the county's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2021 is known as unmodified. This means that the financial statements present fairly the financial position of the county in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And this is often referred to as a clean opinion and is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as auditors. The other report I want to mention is actually at the very end of the financial statements on pages 142 and 43. And that's a report on internal controls and compliance matters. Unlike the audit report, which I just mentioned, it is not an opinion on internal controls or compliance, but rather it's a report on any findings or deficiencies that we may find based on our audit testing. We did not note any instances of noncompliance with laws and regulations. However, we did identify one material weakness and one significant deficiency, which is explained further on page 144. Those two issues really related to accounts and bank reconciliations. And I do want to mention that last year we ended up with, I believe, 5 findings. So this year we're at 2. So we do see that as a significant improvement, and we're happy to see that result. So that's kind of a summary of the 2 audit reports, one audit report and the compliance report. And I'll just turn it over to Ashley to go through some of the key financial highlights.
Perfect, thank you. I'm actually going to have you just focus on the printed copy. It's the colored form rather than have you flipping through the 145 pages of financial data. So I'm going to start on page 3 of that printout and just go over some key financial highlights for the statements. First, we're going to touch base on our government-wide financial statements. This includes all funds of the county as well as 2 component units, our Board of Education and the Wicomico County Library. This is really a long-term view and more on a business accounting than our fund statements, which we'll talk about further. A few key notes about our primary government, which includes all of our governmental funds and our business-type enterprises. The unrestricted net position totaled $37 million, or just 24.1% of our net position. That's a $10.5 million increase from the prior year. However, since the commonly is mostly focused on our fund financial statements, we're going to spend a little more time talking about those changes through the funds. Taking a look at our general fund, the unassigned fund balance does remain strong at $52 million, which is 73% of our total fund balance. There are 5 different classifications of your fund balance, the unassigned being with not fitting into any of the other purposes, whether it's restricted, assigned, committed, or non-spendable. General fund revenues increased from 2020 by $12 million, whereas general fund expenditures only increased by $228,000 from 2020. There was an increase in our fund balance or the health of the government or the county of $12.6 million. This was definitely a unique year with our COVID funding, grants that were able to cover certain expenditures. So definitely a unique year when we're looking back at these revenues and expenses. Looking at our budget to actual revenues and expenses, actual revenues as compared to our budget were $10.6 million in a favorable variance, or that's 7.18%. Actual expenditures, excluding transfers or fund balance appropriation, were $7 million less than budgeted amounts, and a lot of that has to do with timing, supply chain issues, as well as just personnel staffing. Taking a look at our general fund revenues over the past 5 years, sometimes I think a chart can just give 1,000 words. You can see a steady increase in our property taxes. Property values have increased. as well as our income taxes. From 2016 to 2021, they've increased by $11 million. We're actually seeing that across all of our governments with the income tax payouts, which was significantly unexpected, if we would have been talking about this during the first parts of the shutdown. And our other revenues, which includes our grants as well as other charges for services, were at $28 million, which is a $3 million increase from last year. Taking a look at our expenditures for the general fund, salaries totaled just over $26 million. Operating expenses, which would include our capital outlay as well as other operating expenses, were $48 million. And then we have our debt service, and we always split out our Board of Education payments. Now, when you see the $47 million for the Board of Education, that's not the total funding for the Board of Education. That just consists of the maintenance of efforts. We also have debt principal and interest payments on behalf of the Board of Education. The total funding is $57.9 million. Taking a look at our fund balance, or as I mentioned earlier, the health of the county over the past 5 years, you can see a steady trend of an increase over the past 5 years. And that's really something that we're looking at when we're looking at the long-term sustainability of any government, and to look at the health. Total fund balance, or as I mentioned, total unassigned fund balance was just north of $52 million. The remainder are fit into other categories, such as non-spendable, restricted for various purposes, assigned for certain purposes, or committed funds. Taking a look at the enterprise funds, or our business type activities, we wanted to drill down the focus on two, just to kind of our comparative purposes. For solid waste, which is our landfill, revenues increased from 2020 by just over $1 million. Expenses increased by just under $1 million. We did see a decrease in our net position compared to an increase in our net position of 2020, but that is due to a $1.4 million transfer for capital projects at the solid waste. So it's not necessarily a loss, it's really just money moving over to fund future capital projects. Just as a note, the depreciation, which is a non-cash expense for the landfill, was $2.5 million. So when we're talking about these decreases in net position, it's important to note the non-cash piece of it. Similar, the airport saw a decrease in its revenues from 2020 of $195,000. Expenses increased from 2020 by $215,000, and there was a decrease in the net position by $1.2 million. Again, depreciation is a huge piece of that decrease in net position, whereas when we received capital grants over the years to fund various capital projects, it's revenue in the year that we had received it and spent it, but then you have the depreciation consistently over the life of that asset. So it really does kind of skew the numbers, but that was just north of $4 million.
And Ashley, and you have to straight line that depreciation. You don't accelerate it like a business does, or something.
Nope, straight line depreciation. You don't get the first 20% in the first year or anything like that. Correct. And then again, I'm a lover of graphs, so we have a trend of our solid waste fund, revenues, operating expenses, and the operating income or loss. I think this shows a really positive trend for the fund. For a while, we were really, we had some concerns about solid waste years ago, and now we're really seeing a stronger management as well as the revenues increasing. So I think that's important to note. Similar with the airport, it's been tough for travel across the United States. So we do have our revenues, and these are our operating revenues, not including our grants, of just over $1 million, whereas our expenses do include all the expenses of the airport. And again, that change in net position, including depreciation of $1.2 million. Now that we've touched base on a lot of the key financial highlights across the financial statements, of course, if you have any questions as you're reading through them late at night, please feel free to email us at any time. About half of those are actually pension and other post-employment details in the footnotes, but there are some good financial data. If I could direct your attention to the front part of the financial statements when you're looking through them at night, there is the management discussion and analysis, which is a really key important of information. Looking forward, now that we've looked back at this past year, for fiscal year 2022, there is a new GASB being implemented. This will only affect the business type activities as well as your government-wide financial statements, and it relates to operating leases. This requires the recognition of certain lease right-of-use assets and right-of-use liabilities for any lease. So whereas you've had capital leases in the past, now all operating leases are being treated in a different fashion. Again, only affects your government-wide financial statements, not your funds. But as you enter or hear about any leases or entering any leases going forward, it's important to kind of keep the change in reporting in your mind. You do have a smaller packet that is with the financial statements, the thinner bound copy. Just a couple items I want to mention from our required auditor's communications. It does include 2 letters. The first one is our management letter or our best practice recommendations. I want to make sure to note that it used to be 4 or 5 pages, now it has decreased down, but we do still have some key recommendations going forward, specifically related to some of our grants and some other items. The second letter is our required communication with those charged with governance. This is a required accounting report, has a lot of the required accounting language in there, but one of the things that I wanted to mention is that we had no issues with any compliance issues, no issues with any of the other reporting, as well as we did see that there was no help for any outside accountants this year, which is actually different than our previous report, so I wanted to make sure to point that out. Now that I've rambled on about some financial highlights, does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned the previous help. That was the 2 previous years that we had outside help?
Correct.
Okay. But this year we didn't?
Did not.
Good. Thank you.
Joe?
Yes, I have a couple questions. First, you said you had provided this. We just got this in our brief book just before the meeting, which is 150 pages. It's kind of hard to digest all of it. How long has it been since you've provided it to the executive's office?
We met with the executive's office last week.
Last week, so it just came in last week. Okay, so all right. Nobody's got a crystal ball, okay? But I'm sure as accountants, you follow what's happening in the world. What do you see as far as the inflation issue? Is there skepticism out there about where we might be headed?
Of course, with any changes in inflation or pricing or any uncertainty, we're hearing from a lot of our clients just general fear coming around. We're talking with a lot of our clients about price increases from their end, which of course on the county's end, you're going to see those price increases from your vendors. So when you're taking a look at the future, there's going to be general increases in your expenditures across the board. So I think that's important to note as you're taking a look at this upcoming budget.
And we're looking at a $12 million increase, right?
Correct.
Okay. How much of that was due to COVID funds?
Most of that is actually due to your increases in your other revenues. You actually saw an $8 million increase in your income taxes.
See that?
That was a big piece, and that's hard to predict year to year, the income. I said that's hard to predict what that number's going to be year to year, the income tax figure.
I understand that, but I mean, I know we've ended up with a lot of COVID funds, so I mean, that has some impact on this, right?
The ARPA funds specifically, which was received in May or June of last year, those actually are not recognized as revenue within these financial statements because they had not been spent as of June 30th. So those will actually have an impact going forward. But, sorry.
Can I feed on that for a minute?
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask that same question. So the ARPA, it was 10 million, I believe, and then I think we get 10 million in this next
Correct.
fiscal year. But that's not reflected, but then you said, but it will be reflected in the expenses.
So
how does that all offset each other? I guess is where I'm going with that.
So there's been a multitude of different types of COVID funding. So we've had the ARPA funds, which are not actually considered revenue until you actually spend the money. So going forward, when the money is allocated to, appropriate projects, it will actually become revenue, and you'll have the expenses at that point. But there was also CARES funding relating to the airport, as well as certain COVID expenditure funding. So those types of things happened this year, but the really large piece for most governments is the ARPA funding. And since it wasn't received till June, being able to really decide what projects those are used for, most have not spent it in relation to fiscal year 2021. But that is something that's coming down the pipeline. The other big piece of the increase in our net position was your recordation tax. With the amount of properties that had been sold, that was up $1.9 million, which is a huge piece of that.
Property taxes. Looks like we had a pretty large increase in the past 5 years of property taxes.
We have,
Always hear the evils of the revenue cap, and I'll sit here and look at this large increase in property taxes, so does it look like it's holding us back too much?
well, especially for fiscal year 2021, we did have a large increase in our base across the state, and we're seeing that in other governments as well, just from the value of properties increasing. And that's not something that I think anyone could have predicted this past year with how much properties have increased in value for that base. So that's really the large increase for 2021.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the income tax and the increase that we've had in the county, I know a lot of businesses got PPP funding, a lot of COVID funding, and that was recorded as income. So could that be somewhat, I don't want to say falsely elevated, but like it looks higher and next year it's not going to be the same?
So the PPP funding is actually excluded from income for the business taxes, as well as if a personal Schedule C excluded, it's considered tax exempt income. So it actually wouldn't affect this number.
Okay.
But a lot of unemployment was still actually taxable for the state of Maryland. So that could have a little bit of a false inflation on this number.
Okay.
Whereas depending on people's income base, some of the unemployment could be taxable, which it would be not typical income, but it did replace other income that they would have.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Josh?
On that note, are other counties, did they see the same significant jump in income taxes?
We saw income taxes jump across all of our clients, all of our governmental clients saw an increase. Maybe not necessarily to this proportion, but a similar increase.
Yeah, I thought the local income tax, that was refreshing to see that.
That was like $8 million more than you budgeted, I believe.
Yeah. A big increase.
Yes.
In reference to some other issues in here, investment earnings being down to the large extent that they were, I think it was a huge, was it 94%? I forget. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was concerned about that. The last 2 years, you've seen the investment earnings just plummeting. And then we had and sometimes I don't know whether I should be asking the auditors or the finance director some of these questions. But you also had the hospitalization disability had almost a 500% increase. And then those are the two that I was very concerned. There's some others, but those two for right now. Any comments in reference to those two? Or is that consistent with the market in general?
So the investment earnings really is a function of how much money you're making on your cash, which is in MILGIP, a Maryland Local and Government Investment Pool. They actually issued their rate drop late, or what I would consider late. So you didn't see that effect in 2020. Our investment earnings were actually up in 2020. Then we actually saw the rate change for MILGIP, and we saw a large drop across all of our clients for 2021, not just the county. So that is what we're seeing elsewhere, and I feel like that's really consistent with what we're seeing from our personal clients as well. The hospitalization really is just an increase in insurance and other benefits which have increased across the way. You'll actually find in the OPEB footnote where the healthcare rate trends are documented from the actuary, and we're seeing an increase from those. And I think that's, looking out further, we're going to continue to see an increase from those as well.
Okay. The debt limitation, 9.5% decrease, I'm assuming that's because we didn't go to the bond market?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. If you don't borrow, you're going to reduce your debt. I think we're making up for it this year, though. which you'll find, I guess, when you come back in another year. I guess the other question that I had was in your mention on page 14 of the financial statements, I didn't see where the public safety building was in there, even though the CIP had, and I know the CIP is a planning document, but they had 19.6 million for 22 in the CIP, and I didn't see it mentioned as a capital projects, various capital projects on there. I don't know if it was an oversight or.
So the page 14 is actually part of the management discussion and analysis, and the requirement for us auditors is to, it's actually written by management, written by the finance department in connection with the executive, and they're actually not required to, they don't have to state everything, they can just state key facts about the fiscal year 2022 budget. But, so there's not a requirement to have that in there for the public safety building yet.
Well, that was one of our biggest projects, if not the biggest project in Wicomico County. That was my concern. One thing we don't have, which I probably mentioned to John Pota as well as to Ms. Oland, is when the county does the CIP, one thing we don't get is a past history. In other words, as it is today with the CIP or with some other projects, the public safety building isn't in there, and it was because, well, that was in the CIP from last year. And I think we need an addendum. I don't know if you all would agree, but there needs to be some addendum so that the council can keep track of what happened to the old CIP projects that were planned before. Are you familiar with that with any other government? And I don't know if that's really an auditing issue either.
It's probably not an auditing issue, but we can take a look and see what other governments might receive and be able to provide Ms. Oland as well as the executive with anything we see elsewise that might show trends or something like that.
And the last thing, and I'll stop, is I was very concerned about the enterprise funds. I really was. I thought that we were getting back on some stronger footing with our enterprise accounts, and we don't happen to see that. I know we reviewed some charter amendments that are looking to change the airport, I believe, from an enterprise fund to a department head, which may be appropriate because we invest a lot in the airport, rightfully so. I was a little surprised to see the nursing home was down because I thought that the nursing home was really recovering very well. So I don't know, is there anything that you see where the distinction between enterprise funds should become departments as opposed to, because enterprise funds are usually, if they're making their own money and they're self-sustaining, then that's an enterprise fund. But we haven't seen that in such a long time.
So the GASB does state that with enterprise funds, it's all based upon the difference between an enterprise fund and a governmental fund or a department, as you mentioned, is really the intention of the fund and the budgeting with that fund. So as long as each fund is still budgeting to cover their own costs and not have a consistent appropriation from the general fund, then it's can be still considered an enterprise fund. But what we look at is a trend over a period of time. If it's consistently getting a fund appropriation or a supplemental appropriation from the general fund, then it's really not an enterprise anymore. Then it's really become more of a special revenue fund, like the Civic Center was a few years ago last year when we made that change. Over the airport has been on our radar for a while, but because of the CARES funding that they've received right now, they actually are not receiving a general fund appropriation. So it kind of put our process of that at a halt. And really, we actually were in talks with the finance department just the other day about should we just go ahead and tear off the Band-Aid, for lack of better terms, and make the move, because after this CARES funding runs out, they may or may not be able to cover their costs. But like you said, we don't have a crystal ball, so
right.
Maybe it'll be different at that point.
I don't think the airport's going to cover its cost after the CARES funding is done. And as it relates to the nursing home, I actually thought it was better this year. I didn't have last year's report, but I thought their operating loss was lower than the previous year. But I don't have those figures in front of me.
Right.
It's just my recollection when we were reviewing these. So
I think it's certainly better than it's been in the past.
Right.
The nursing home, due to COVID, has had its own set of challenges.
Sure.
So if it's maintaining where it's at, that's good. So.
And the airport, honestly, I think 80% of 90% of the airport spending is deferred maintenance.
Yes.
And that's what you're seeing. So I don't know. hopefully the CARES funding in addressing, if it's allowable, to address those type of concerns. They may dig themselves out of that hole, because we're talking long-term deferred maintenance that we're trying to catch up with. So
Right.
I would like to be optimistic about that. We have an automated parking system that's got some very small corners, but I was just curious as to, and obviously you are aware of the fact of how long the county may continue with these entities as enterprise accounts or departments.
It is probably important to note that most airports are not considered enterprise funds.
Okay.
Most are, cannot cover their long-term maintenance, as you mentioned.
Okay, it's good to know. Any other questions?
I've got one.
Yeah.
I guess more of an opinion, not a question. Due to the increase in property taxes and increased assessments, we're probably going to have to lower the tax rate due to the revenue cap. Is that correct? Yeah.
It's still in place, yeah.
Yeah. So lowering it past the required amount, would that be detrimental to, we've got a $12 million surplus. And this looks like we're having our taxpayers' money in our bank account. What effects would that have? Any opinion on that?
I think I'd need to run the calculation of what the future revenue cap would look like and what that would produce rate-wise and overall revenue-wise to really kind of dive into that. But I do think when we're saying that our large increase is holding the taxpayer money, some of those are actually projects that are planned, as we were talking about the history of the capital projects, that might not have occurred last year because of whether it's timing or it's unable to get the items to be able to do the project, and those will actually end up bringing down fund balance in the future. So I do think that trend of seeing what projects are coming using that type of money is good to look at too with that revenue cap.
But we were talking about a $12 million increase too now. We weren't talking about
large.
past funding or expected funding. We were talking about the increase.
Any other questions,
I
Nicole?
just have one more quick question, Ashley. We're talking about the fund balance, and I'm looking at all the empty positions that we don't have filled in the county. And I was wondering if you have do you have a percentage or a dollar amount of the fund balance that is based on salaries is it somewhere in that big book you gave me? Can I find it, or?
There is, if you take a look starting on page 130, it does include the budget to actual, which does break it down by salaries, and that might be a good piece to look at.
Okay.
But if not, let us know and I can dig further into some numbers.
Thank you.
Other questions? Any other comments? No? Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Just this copy.
Next on the agenda is Resolution Number 27-2022. This is to adopt the Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2023 through 2027. Council met with several department leaders on February the 1st and on February the 15th for work sessions to discuss the CIP. And as you may recall, there were two changes that were recommended to the plan. The first one is to reduce the Information Technology Central Square Public Safety Suite Pro project from $600,000 to $300,000, and to remove the fiscal year 23 funding for the Public Works Solid Waste Landfill cell construction. This is for cells 7, 8, and 10 project. This project was funded in the fiscal year 22, so the funding is not needed in fiscal year 23. If council wishes to make those changes, the CIP will need to be amended, and there is a handout on your table with some proposed motions in order to do that. And we have Ms. Pam Oland here, Director of Finance, and her assistant, our Deputy Charles, is here as well.
Thank you, Ms. Searle. Entertain a motion from council to approve resolution number 27-2022.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion.
Yes, just a quick
Good
question.
morning, Ms. Oland and
Yeah.
Mr. Pota. You're welcome to join us. How's everybody this morning? Good morning.
Morning, Pam Oland, Finance Director.
Rob Pota, Acting County Executive.
Mr. McCain?
Just a quick question regarding the amendments. Do we have to make those separate, or can they be made cumulatively, or?
I would recommend, because there are different projects, that the motion be made for each project.
Would you like to make the first motion?
Well, I'll make a stab at it. The first motion would be to amend the capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2023 through 2027, the Information Technologies Central Square Public Safety Suite Pro project from $600,000 to $300,000, and to adjust those totals that show those reductions on pages 3, 4, and 9 as provided.
That's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion. Does this work well with?
Yes.
Yes.
I've reviewed the motions and I've reviewed the pages, and those would be the pages that would be amended.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Yes, Joe? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. The second item for a motion on here, Vice President Davis, would you like to read it?
Sure.
You're closer than anyone else.
I make a motion to amend the capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2023.
Need your microphone.
2023 through 2027 to remove the fiscal year 23 funding from the Public Works Solid Waste Landfill Cell Construction Cells 7 and 8 and 10 project in the amount of $6,500,000, and to adjust the totals to show the reduction on pages 3, 6, and 26 as provided by the Director of Finance.
So motion is second?
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion. All those in favor of the motion, of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment is carried. The third motion is recommended. Whoever wants it.
I'll do
Josh?
it. Go ahead, Josh.
Like motion to amend page 2 of the capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2023 through 2027 to add a note at the bottom of the page at the request of the Director of Finance to read, since original submission, an IT project for FY 2023 has been reduced and the solid waste funding for landfill construction has been removed for FY 2023.
We have a motion for an amendment. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Amendment is carried. So we now have 3 amendments. Any further discussion on the CIP in general? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 27-2022 as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Resolution passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this, Ms. Turley.
You're welcome.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so next for your consideration is Resolution Number 28-2022. This is amending the fiscal year 2022 budget, position control document, Exhibit F, to adjust the Wicomico County State's Attorney's salary to be in line with the state code. And we have Pam Olin here for discussion on that.
Thank you. Entertain a motion to approve Resolution 28-2022.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion second. Discussion. All those in favor of Resolution 28-2022, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Resolution passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
We do have State's Attorney Jamie Dykes here with us. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Mr. Hitchens, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I call your attention to Resolution 29, 2022, accepting the Employee Deductions Audit Report.
Entertain a motion from council to approve Resolution 29-2022.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I'll give a quick rundown. The county offers a variety of benefits and programs that require withholding deductions from employee paychecks. Some of the benefits are medical, flex spending accounts, life insurance, and retirement programs. Most of the programs require enrollment during HR's open enrollment period, with a few exceptions. Those are American Fidelity and Empower. The data was tested in multiple ways. The first was to compare payroll deductions to documentation to ensure that employees authorized those deductions. The second was a continuation of that, checking vendor invoices to make sure employees were actually enrolled in the benefits they paid for. And the third test was the reverse of those first two, checking the vendor invoices first to make sure employees are actually paying for benefits that they're signed up for. I did not identify any issues during any of the tests. There were two items in the findings and recommendations sections. The first was for reconciliation. Payroll currently reconciles most of the benefits. I recommend they reconcile them all. And the second recommendation is that the county keep record of changes that come from American Fidelity and Empower, even though employees go directly to those vendors. I would like to thank staff from Human Resources and Payroll. They met with me quickly and a lot. So I'm open to any questions.
Did they agree with your changes?
They did.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 29-2022, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes.
All right, the next one is Resolution 30-2022, accepting the vendor audit report.
Entertain a motion from council to approve Resolution 30-2022.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion.
The county has 4 purchasing thresholds that increase the level of control as the dollar amount increases. This audit focused on the 2 middle levels, which range from $1,000 to $24,999. Testing included looking at purchase orders and requisitions for purchase justification using approved means such as contract piggybacking or the 3-quote rule. Testing also included looking for proper sign-offs as the purchase transaction makes its way from the department to finance. There were 3 items in the findings and recommendations. The first was a mention of duplicate vendors in the vendor database. Multiple vendor entries for a single vendor creates risk for duplicate payments as well as incorrect tax form filings. My recommendation is the county create a system to where duplicate vendors can be consolidated as they're found during the normal course of business. The second item is the recommendation to publish an open checkbook tool on the county's website. Tyler Tech, which produces the Munis system, discontinued the system that we were using. As noted in the management comment, the county is working with Tyler Tech to adopt the new system. And the final item was a note on the 3 quotes policy. There was an instance in which the county is employing landscaping and demolition services on a rotating basis through a list of vetted vendors. The system is logical and deliberate in manner, and I didn't have any issue with this system. It just does not align with the adopted policies and procedures. And for this one, I would like to thank employees across the entire county. I've worked with, I believe, 8 different departments, and they were all quick to get back to me with documentation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Josh?
Do we do this annually? Is this, or how often do you do this?
The vendor audit, this is the first time it's been done since 2014. Purchase cards are done more or less annually at this point.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm glad you pointed out the 3 quotes. I think that is very important, and I'm hoping that the success we have with the new module, and I'm assuming the new module is also coming from Tyler Technologies.
It is.
Yeah, that would be important because I think that's always been very beneficial to the citizens.
I believe so too.
Yeah, very good. That being said, all those in favor of Resolution 30-2022, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Resolution passes.
And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hitchens.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell, good morning.
Good morning. This is Legislative Bill 2020-203, an act to extend the moratorium on issuing building permits for an agricultural storage tank which will store dissolved air, flotation, DAF, wash down water from rendering process pursuant to Wicomico County Code, chapters 225, 125, and 128. The city provides in those chapters a process for issuing a building permit, whereas the storage of waste byproduct known as DAF, that includes matter from the wash down I mentioned before, is a concern voiced by county residents who reside near the locations. where it's being applied. The county has previously determined further study of DAF tank matter is needed, and the county has, in fact, undertaken such a study. The Planning Commission, Planning Zoning is working that up, and it had been presented. That's just an aside. The council desires to avoid issuance of permits for tanks or other facilities for use, continuing the moratorium on the issuance of such permits imposed by legislative bills 2019-07, 2020-01, 2020-13, and 2021-05 to allow the county council time to review legislative recommendations submitted by Wicomico County Planning and Zoning Commission pertaining to storage of DAF material. Section 1 be an act ordained by the county council of the county of the Wicomico County Mayor and the legislative sessions files moratorium is hereby imposed and declared on the issuance of building permits for an agricultural storage tank which will store dissolved air flotation DAF washed down water from rendering process as approved in chapters 225, 125, and 128 of the Wicomico County Code. The moratorium shall apply for a period of 6 months beginning on the effective date of legislative bill 2203. The legislative bill will take effect 60 days after its passage unless a proper petition for referendum is filed.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Entertain a motion to introduce legislative bill number 2022-03.
Moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. President?
Yes, Josh.
I will say I did have a conversation about getting further, as we want to get further details on these types of containers and other processes to hold materials that are closely aligned with DAF. We did reach out to, as of last council, I did say that I would reach out to a local company that basically works with anaerobic digestion. And so they had actually let them know that the council would actually maybe like to see a tour of the facility. So I'm going to send around an email there. They would love to share what they do as we take in all this information to make sure that we're making the right decision on this going forward. This could be another important element to have. So I'm going to send around to Ms. Hurley and the rest of the, so we can see if we can get something scheduled. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the introduction of legislative bill 2022-03 say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Introduction of legislative bill 2022-03 passes. Ms. Hurley?